Yeah, I caught because she did such a great job.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, she's loving it.
Yeah.
She's learning a lot. Growing up.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No doubt about it.
As long as they stay here.
I know, I was trying to watch the sun too.
These are so strange. They are.
I get it.
I feel like when I see it in our schools, right?
How's it going?
Sorry, I didn't know y'all were still recording. I thought y'all were done.
Oh, when
Yeah.
last time we were over
Yelled in your
time,
room. Yeah, that's
we were not done, but they were, it was mostly a conversation between them.
You're doing the after party thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to.
Yeah, no. We
Are you
have
coming tomorrow?
On the head.
I don't know. I want to, but we got a few other things going on.
I have not seen that.
Somebody posted this is trash.
The only reason we still have these up is so that the county health department, they told us.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, that's worth the trade-off. I think that's
So,
the trade-off.
I take the distorted, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a really funny story about that too. I don't want to interrupt this talk, but.
We'll probably be just a minute. You know where Sydney?
I should have restroom.
Just
Someone
gonna,
walking down the hall.
just gonna check on one technical thing and she comes out. Okay.
The state says kids can't take their masks off on plastic desk shields. So we call them desk masks. So every student is masked.
You call it these masks.
Yeah, these are wraparound desk masks. I'm not kidding. See how language?
I like it.
And we told our county health department about it. And there were some.
I was expecting like one person.
And then people that had approved our plan said, yes, those are masks.
Is that right? Amazing. That's great.
The student becomes a teacher, are you gonna make fun of me?
I am actually. Hope that's okay.
Yeah. I tortured you for a year in pre-calc. It's absolutely, you're right.
It's her duty now.
Nope.
We had to cut it down to like 3 comments. Directed towards you, yeah. She
What?
had a whole list.
We can just see the slides or?
Yeah. I need to share that. Let's see if I can pull it up on phone.
Want some help turning the projector on?
Yeah, that could be helpful.
Oh, yeah. Hey, by the way, your talk was fantastic.
Hey.
Oh, you got it. You don't need my help.
Did I do it?
Yeah, you did.
That's not mine though.
Alright, so the,
That's not yours?
Yeah. 1 second, we'll find it.
they were.
Oh,
Yeah.
For the people here?
Well, that's what I was
Oh.
figuring.
She's gonna present in front of the slides.
Donald does.
Oh,
for both people.
That's very organized.
They were.
I think they were. We came out of it.
Yeah, he's working on it.
Oh, no, that's right, they are right here.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, he was a doctoral, I think, supervisor of Vermont. Yeah.
and do you have slides?
Yeah.
Yeah, when there's the transition. Alright, that looks good to me. Let me just close. Let me just close this. Hey, Tori, could you close those down? Just like the student task.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I can walk.
It was nice because I see you community coordination plan.
How that works.
Just changing.
Yeah, no, it's I have to.
Yeah, so I have to. I want to.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah, I want to go back and look at that.
You
Do I
good?
have enough space for you? If you want to throw any of your papers onto the.
Use this.
These are
That noise.
foundation, people joining.
Do you have some paper?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we can go to this slide without the.
Is this the
I don't know, is it for lighting it all, or?
I had that in here just to give you some extra light, but we can move it.
I just didn't know, because there's people over there.
Yeah, I don't know how much it does. Thank you. I had a vision of like professional cameras with it. And that's what I came up with.
Drone.
Yeah, there you go. All right, well, I think we're ready to go. Let me make sure I admit everybody.
This is the biggest job I've seen in the room.
Let me just.
I know, I was shocked.
Sydney is this. So first slide, we leave blank into. All right. Probably just pause a minute while everybody admits.
Okay, sounds good. Oh yeah, I can be in front of it, because there's no slide. Okay.
All right, feel free to go ahead.
Where's Papa going with that axe? Said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. Out to the hog house, replied Mrs. Arable. Some pigs were born last night. That's the first line from Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling begins. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were perfectly normal, thank you very much. Here is Edward Bear coming downstairs now, bump, 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 on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. And so the tale of Winnie the Pooh by A.A. Milne begins. Ah, Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, Joe grumbled. Louisette May Alcott penned that line to begin Little Women. And of course, there's the classic, once there were 4 children, Susan, Edmund, Peter, and Lucy, from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. Do you remember reading those first lines? Maybe not those first lines specifically, but do you remember that feeling? The feeling of stepping into a new world for the first time, starting the first chapter of a new book, or even reading that first word on a crisp page that you might have even smelled if you're honest. Anyways, even though I was never the biggest bookworm, I can still remember that feeling of reading a good book for the very first time. But enough with the nostalgia. Do you still have that experience with education now? If you're anything like me, your experience of education might sound a little bit more like this. Do we really have to read 30 pages from our APUSH textbook just tonight? Or maybe you're like me on a school night, lazily skimming the pages of your required reading while sipping some lemonade and listening to some cranked up Taylor Swift to drone out the noise of physics explanations. Sorry, not sorry, Mr. Stefanovich. There's that all too familiar sentence that you or one of your friends, or maybe a student in your life has said, I literally hate school. Maybe it's been a while since you've been in high school, and your career is disappointing you. It's not as exciting as it used to be. So what's the difference between that childlike wonder and excitement and this now aching frustration? Whether you're a student, a teacher, or a parent, what changed in your mindset so that what you used to call learning or education, you now call work? How can we be more like those surprising people? The ones that say, wow, I'm finding a new way to look at the world. Or, I actually really like school. Or even, this book changed the way I see the world. Let's face it, you probably came to this FOI talk, if you're a student, for the extra credit. And let me just say same, because that's the only reason I've come for many years. Or maybe you looked at the title and you said, yeah, my education has failed me. Or maybe you just thought, whoa, wait a second. Let me get this right. Sydney Reinke is saying her education failed her? Yeah, I'm coming here to roast liberty. Whatever your reason, I want to be honest with you for a second. I have lied to you. I know, not the best way to start my presentation. My education did not fail me. I have failed in my education. No, my education did not fail me, but over and over again, I have failed in my education. And I came to this year, maybe like many of you, and I wondered, is there a way to love my life? Is there a way to capture that first page kind of joy again? That first line of a new world kind of excitement? To love my life that is 12 hours of reading and note-taking day after day, my life that is weeks of school and weekends of homework, my life that seems so pointless so much of the time. Is there a way to stop going through the motions? To find that feeling that's almost like falling in love with something all over again? And then I met a guy. Before you're like, whoa, Sydney is spilling the tea out here today, let me tell you who it is. I met C.S. Lewis. Now don't worry, I didn't actually meet him in real life. It's more that I confronted him. I've always loved reading C.S. Lewis, from the Chronicles of Narnia to the Space Trilogy to the Screwtape Letters. Thanks, Mr. Holton. But this year, I confronted head-on Lewis's perspective on the biggest struggle in my day-to-day, education itself. So come with me and come meet this man. Come meet C.S. Lewis and his ideas. Let's see if we can find that joy for learning all over again, or if our education really has failed us. Now today, we're going to take and explore a lesser-known work by C.S. Lewis called The Abolition of Man. We'll first look at how Lewis describes man as made up of three parts: the mind, the chest, and the belly, and how he correspondingly describes virtue as the correlation between the mind and the chest. We'll then apply these principles to discover how to attain virtue in regards to knowledge. Let me say that again in English. We'll talk about how to love learning. And then we'll take a look at what you've all been waiting for. Whether liberty is cultivating a sense and a love for learning, or whether it's failing, and whether each of us are cultivating a love for learning within ourselves. So let's begin. So what is the abolition of man? Well, good question. The Abolition of Man was originally a set of lectures that C.S. Lewis presented at King's College in 1943, concerning education and advancement in the time he was living through. If you haven't read it, here's a bit of background that would help you understand my speech. Lewis explains how man is constantly seeking for power over the thing which he calls nature. With things like the airplane or the radio, Lewis notes that man keeps advancing to have greater control over his surroundings and his circumstances. And so Lewis poses this question to his audience: why must our conquest of nature stop short in stupid reverence before this final and toughest bit of nature, which has hitherto been called the conscience of man? C.S. Lewis asks us whether we should stop conquering things once we get to man himself. Should we use our knowledge to grasp the ultimate control? Control to make the type of humans that we want, becoming what he calls conditioners of men. C.S. Lewis answers this question by urging his audience to see that by naming man as just another bit of nature to be conquered, we degrade ourselves to the status of material, of circumstance. And so you see the paradox. By conquering ourselves, we are no longer the conquerors, but we become the conquered. And we cause the abolition of man. And yet, C.S. believes that there's another option, another way to use the knowledge that we seek. In order to understand this other option, let's first understand how Lewis talks about man. Lewis divides man into three parts. He says it's the head, the chest, and the belly. Now that might sound a little bit confusing, so let me explain that a little bit clearer. First, Lewis says that the belly is the center of appetites, the center of any desires or cravings that we have about the world. The chest is the center of emotion, where man feels things in reaction to what he believes. And the head, he says, is the center of reason, the source of man's rationality about the world. This actually comes from Plato's conception of man as a charioteer. He says each of us are driving our own chariot. We're the charioteer, and that's our mind. Then we have two forces. One, he says, is the spirited element, and one is the appetites. These two forces are raging against each other, and it's our job to control them and lead a successful chariot race. Okay, yeah. So C.S. Lewis actually has a little bit of a different perception around this idea. He says the head rules the belly through the chest. The head rules the belly through the chest. So not the head rules the belly and the chest like Plato, but instead the head rules the belly through the chest. Lewis's picture would look a little bit more like this. A buccaneer, one single rider riding a horse. The rider is still the mind, and the horse is still the appetites. But now you have reins. That's the chest, the center of emotion, to control the horse. The idea is that man's appetites are controlled through an alignment between the mind and the chest. To illustrate this on a more personal level, perhaps, let's take a look at some chocolate cake. Here's some chocolate cake. Now, I'm guessing if you're a normal human being, you kind of might want to have a slice of this. Sorry, I didn't actually bring chocolate cake. And it's pretty normal to want to have a slice. But what if you wanted to have the whole cake? Or maybe not even just the whole cake, but you wanted to have it for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner. Cake all the time, every single day, 24/7. Well, let's take a look at this situation from Lewis's lens on the man. Clearly, you have that appetite for cake all day, every day. Well, what does the mind have to say about it? The reason might recognize that this meal plan is not the most healthy idea in the world. And that's pretty smart. But what you actually choose to do is probably going to depend on your responding emotion. If you feel thrill about this idea to have a cake lifestyle, then you'll probably choose to do just that. And this misalignment between the head and the chest is how Lewis says that vice develops. In this case, the vice would be gluttony. But what if your emotion was in line with your head? Let's say your emotion is instead nauseated. You think about this idea, you actually kind of feel a little bit sick inside. Well, you'll probably choose to refrain from eating cake all the time then. And you'll have developed a virtue. Congrats! This time, you have developed temperance. So we've come to an understanding of virtue, which, according to many hundreds of people for thousands of years, is the key to happiness. So don't worry, we're getting closer to that idea about loving your life and loving learning. According to Lewis's system, there are two keys to developing virtue. Like we just explained, your emotions have to be aligned with your reason. But what if your rationality is all messed up? Let's say in the last situation, instead of your mind telling you it's not a good idea, your mind actually told you that it's the healthiest meal plan in the world and you should eat cake 24/7. Uh-oh, that's not very logical at all. And so if your emotion was aligned with that rationality, you still wouldn't have virtue. To have virtue, your rationality must be correct. It must be aligned with a higher truth, an ultimate rationality. And then your emotion must be aligned with that rationality. With this new insight, let's dive into how to find happiness and virtue in regards to knowledge. For the purposes of this talk, we're going to define knowledge as synonymous with truth, and talk about it as an entity outside of man that he can engage with through his belly, his chest, and his mind. So let's go to that first step of developing virtue, having a correct rationality. So what does higher reason have to say about knowledge? Well, I would argue that objective truth says that knowledge is inherently beautiful. Mr. Lovely liked that one. Knowledge is good. Knowledge is beautiful. But at this point you might be saying, whoa, 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 wait a second, Sydney. I thought we were on the same page here. I thought we were on the same team, bro. I thought you were just as disillusioned about knowledge as I was. It feels so purposeless. How could it be beautiful? Isn't it just something that Mr. Lovely repeats in pre-calc to get us to engage? Well, yes, to be honest, I struggle with seeing knowledge as beautiful all the time. It seems almost too idealistic. But remember, then I met C.S. Lewis. And like those first words of a new book, he urges us to look afresh at things that we have previously counted out. So just do this one thing for me. Take off those blurry glasses that you're wearing around your mind and look at knowledge one more time, for it is beautiful. And I could give you a full-blown proof to reason with you over that fact, but I think I'd rather show you. You see, this week, I did something. I asked all my peers one simple question. What's one time, inside of school or outside of school, that you've engaged with knowledge and it's been beautiful? And these are the wonders that my friends have told me about. Physics. I was not expecting that one, to be completely honest. One of my friends recounted the beauty that she saw in a lesson about black holes. Now, the lesson she recounted was one without notes. It wasn't to prepare for a quiz or a test. It was just all about learning. And noticeably, the notes that she did not take were replaced by a note of joy in her mind and in the way she expressed it to me. So that was one example. The next one was programming. Another peer told me that she saw beauty when she was able to program these designs called fractals in programming. Now, I'm no expert, but apparently fractals are these patterns that repeat again and again. And according to the Fractal Foundation, which I Googled to then learn what fractals were, they are self-similar across different scales. Basically, think about a leaf's veins. If you zoom in closer, the veins keep repeating smaller and smaller on each subsequent vein. And fractals are like that, but they keep going forever. And my friend learned how to create them through a program. And to her, it's beautiful. So beautiful. But my favorite response was this one. I FaceTimed one of my friends to ask her the question I'd been asking everyone. But unlike the others, she immediately said she knew just the thing. She turned to her bookshelf and she pulled out a book called Looking for Alaska by Mr. Mayer's absolutely favorite person in the world, John Green. Immediately, she knew what spoke to her of beauty. And then she read me this. When adults say, teenagers think they are invincible, with that sly, stupid smile on their faces, they don't know how right they are. We need never be hopeless, because we can never be irreparably broken. We think that we are invincible, because we are. Like all energy, we can only change shapes and sizes and manifestations. They forget that when they get old. They get scared of losing and failing. But that part of us greater than the sum of our parts cannot begin and cannot end, and so it cannot fail. And she looked at me and she said, that's the human soul. That part of us that cannot begin and cannot end, and it's so beautiful. And it's so beautiful. Wow, to find beauty and knowledge like that again. Could we capture that every moment that we engage with knowledge? But I know what you're thinking. These people I asked were probably just nerds, because no one actually enjoys learning like that. Well, you're right. Most of us don't. Because whether we know it or not, most of us engage with knowledge in a pursuit of power. Yes, in a pursuit for power. You see, very often we have desires, and we think that knowledge can be used as a tool to achieve those desires. Whether it's advancement, success, money, fame, we use knowledge. And we lose sight of the fact that knowledge can be beautiful, and it is an end in and of itself. If it's used improperly in a pursuit for power rather than a pursuit for beauty, our rationality concerning knowledge becomes flawed, and we lose the chance to develop virtue with knowledge. Now I want to tell you a familiar story. It's the story of the Garden of Eden. Now whether you're religious or not, this story shows a classic contrast between beauty and power. If you haven't heard the story, here's a very quick recap. At the fabled beginning of time, there were two perfect humans living in a utopian garden. And in this garden, there are two trees, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. But tragically, they are tricked by a snake into disobeying God and eating from the one tree he has forbidden them to eat from, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I want to read you from Genesis, in which the snake tricks these two humans, because I think it will illustrate my point really well. Genesis 3:4-6 reads, "You will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman. For God knows that when you eat from the tree, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. Notice that the snake's trickery centers less around the actual fruit, and more around the reason for why she should eat the fruit. The contents of both trees, created by God, are potentially good, but the reason for the use of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil has become corrupted. The snake convinces Eve that this fruit will make her like God. He stirs her desire for power. Notice the flawed logic that leads to the fall of man is the use of knowledge, not for beauty, but for power. And the classic antithesis between these two trees suggests this. If we humans engage with knowledge for power, it leads to death. But then there's the opposite tree, the tree of life. Just might provide its gifts when we engage with knowledge for beauty. Maybe life itself is wrapped up in how we interact with knowledge. With this in mind then, where are we at in terms of having virtue in regards to knowledge? We've talked about that first aspect, having a correct rationality. In other words, believing that knowledge is beautiful. But what about aligning our emotions? And this is the problem for many of us. That's where the dread and stress and frustration comes along with schooling and education. See, as much as we might know knowledge is beautiful, we don't feel happiness in our chests when we experience knowledge. Luckily, Lewis talks about training our emotions to be aligned with our reason. And this is where education comes in. Education, a chance to practice correctly aligned emotions in regard to knowledge. So finally, time to roast liberty. Philosophic roast. How is liberty doing? First off, does our school pursue knowledge for beauty or for power? And more importantly, do we pursue knowledge for beauty or for power? Well, Liberty is a college preparation school, but it's also a classical school. Let's look at both of those ideas. As much as college preparation is useful in the modern world, it is also perhaps one of the most draining aspects of students' lives. Why? Well, you might not have realized this before, but this too is very often, unfortunately, a pursuit for power. A pursuit after grades, success, money, numbers, rankings, praise, the list goes on. I'm sure you know and have seen kids that are pursuing that list. I know I've been one of those kids myself. I've been the kid exhausted over trying to maintain a 4.0, just reading the textbook to pass the quiz, going through hours of notes to get that one letter. That letter just 3 lines, just an A on top of my page. And I'm sure along with them, you've seen the burden, the lack of sleep, the exhaustion, the wear that life has. And maybe you've met or been that adult, the one working late hours to get that more money. Not for any apparent need of it, but just because that's the right thing to do, isn't it? But you see, that's exactly what C.S. Lewis warns us against. That if we try to conquer ourselves, to shape ourselves, we become the conquered. We are forced to consider ourselves nothing more than material, than nature, than letters, than grades, than scores. And don't we all do that? Don't we call ourselves as valuable as a letter or as valuable as a number and then get confused when we feel worthless? Don't we dehumanize ourselves so often? But then, liberty is also a classical school. There's that traditional pursuit after knowledge for beauty. But sometimes we mess even that up. We forget the principle of Mutilum Nonbolton, which is a maxim from Pliny the Elder. And it means not many things, but much. Not many things, but much. Not dozens of books, but one that you dive deeply into. Not hundreds of disconnected dates from history, but a few stories that tell us what it means to be human. You see, the pursuit of beauty and knowledge is rarely the pursuit after bucket loads of knowledge, but instead to grasp deeply for the truth. But it's so easy to forget that final vision. Not to have knowledge, but to love the knowledge you have. To find happiness. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, schools, just like people, will constantly be needing to get back on track, to remember the end goal. And so we cannot blame education or the schooling we get for the way we learn. At the end of the day, it is our mindsets that matter. You see, students, and all of us are students in some way or another, are our mindsets seeking power, or are we seeking beauty? Ask yourself that question. Well, that's all well and good, and maybe you feel properly diagnosed by Dr. Sidney. But what's the cure? What if we recognize knowledge for its beauty, maybe even after just hearing this talk, but we still don't feel happiness in our chests? Well, we must train our emotions. But how? This is what I would suggest. Start finding the emotions in what you learn. And too often, we think that's just happiness. But find that anger in the injustice of history, the deep sadness of a lost character in literature, that strange satisfaction in understanding a math theorem, the disgust with those who mocked the scientific geniuses. Engage with these topics as if they were people, for you see, in a way they are. You're meeting people all the time if you only open up your mind to see it. The people who have thought and reasoned and battled life just like you have. But now the choice is yours. For how many presentations and lyceums and teachers and parents have you listened through and not changed? And how many more will you listen through and still not change? And keep living this dead kind of life? I beg you even now to turn. Turn from that emptiness. Otherwise you will turn and liberty will be gone, and college will be gone, and your career will be gone, and your family will be gone, and your retirement will be gone, and your life will be gone too. For you see, that fresh first page of a book so quickly becomes going through the pages, the middle pages, and all of a sudden you're at the end. But right now we only know that we're somewhere in the midst of it. We're somewhere in the midst of our own stories. Maybe you're 42 pages in, and you're realizing with Huck Finn, the sky looks ever so deep when you lay down on your back in the moonshine. I never noted it before. Or maybe you're only in chapter 3, and if you listen closely, Atticus is saying to you from To Kill a Mockingbird, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. Or maybe you're on page 122 of The Scarlet Letter, and you're with Dimmesdale, and your heart is vibrating in unison with theirs, and receiving their pain into itself, and sending its own throb of pain through 1,000 other hearts. But right now, you're missing those beautiful lines. Those beautiful lines not at the beginning, not at the end, and most of them not even famous lines, but just middle lines. And you might say, but what does it matter if I miss a few lines in my life? But if you keep missing them, then you'll miss the whole story. You'll miss it. And you could be at the climax now, and you wouldn't even know it. So I beg you to stop skimming the book of your life. And I beg of you this, take into your hands now your life, your story, your middle pages, and read your pages. For that is how the enchantment of the first pages live on. That engagement, that joy, that acknowledgement of the beauty is how education, for what it truly is, becomes no longer a burden, but perhaps life itself. Thank you for coming to my FOI talk. I would now be happy to answer any questions, hear any thoughts, comments, whatever you think.
We've got a couple comments from the chat box. Question for Sydney from Hannah. What motivated you to look closer at knowledge and find the true beauty? maybe
That's
you
a
can
good
start.
question. Well, like I kind of said, C.S. Lewis helped me especially to kind of look deeper into that. I've always read C.S. Lewis, but this year we read C.S. Lewis' Abolition of Man in AP Lang, and we're learning all about education. And I was just kind of thinking, most of my time is devoted to education, to schooling. Every single day, I spend almost all my time doing homework, doing schoolwork, and I was thinking, I was talking with one of my friends actually, and we were talking and saying, what if we died tomorrow? Would we be happy with where we're at? And I was thinking, what if I died and all I had done was high school? Would I be happy? What if I didn't make it to college? I was thinking, then I have to find some joy in what I'm doing just right now. And I have to find meaning in just this, even if there's nothing beyond it. So that would be my answer.
That's wonderful, thank you. Lillian Kreisberg says, do you think it takes a good teacher to show learning is beautiful, or the student to think deeper? And you have to be careful when you answer this question, because you have some teachers in the room. So go ahead, teacher or student, what do you think?
Well, I think it's definitely a balance. And I think teachers, of course, well, they've already lived more life than us. And so they've already had to struggle with that battle themselves. And so I think they're excellent guides. But at the end of the day, you also have to choose it for yourself, because if you choose not to engage, there's nothing that a teacher can do, because they can't get inside your head. They can't live your life for you. But I do think it's important that teachers especially emphasize that possibility of using knowledge, not for power, not for grades, success, but really for that beauty, and not even just saying it, but just showing it, because it's hard for students to recognize that. And, having already lived, I think that, and lived more time, that teachers can really help with that. But at the end of the day, yes, you do have to make that decision, that commitment as a student yourself.
It's a good answer. Well done.
Questions maybe from here, anybody in the room?
I'll ask a question. I appreciated your survey of your peers. Just got to get a sense for where they were touched by beauty.
Yeah.
Is there a role, as you see it, in terms of the teachers providing models, really being passionate and drawn to the beauty of their subject area of knowledge? Is there a role for peers working with one another, just as you've been asking them to try to cultivate this desire that you touched on?
Yeah, I think actually, yeah, definitely. And I think even asking my peers, it really helped me. It was towards this last week of really finalizing my presentation, and I've been working on it for a long time, and it really stirred that passion in me for it again, just seeing that this really is true, and it's not just me. And I think that's just core to the human experience, just to connect with other humans outside of yourself. And I think especially peers, yeah, definitely could help with that.
Maybe I'll just follow up. Is there anything you could do, given the school setting, right, to essentially try to prod or inspire or otherwise help each other in this class, right? Because
Yeah.
you define, like Lewis just said, the power approach, just trying to use knowledge so as control. That's going to kind of peter out,
Yeah.
The impulse or the motivation is not going to be perhaps sufficient. But you did suggest that somehow capturing this vision of beauty would be inspired. Black holes, fractals, and so on.
Yeah.
Is there anything y'all could do, peers could do with one another? This is just again off the cuff that you think might provide fellow travelers inspiration.
Yeah, so if you're on Zoom and you didn't hear, I'll
I've
just
typed it
say
in.
that again. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I think a few things. I think one time when I think that my peers have really inspired me in a school setting is presentations. And I think just even speaking up in front of your peers, especially if teachers are encouraging them to share their own life experiences or their own connection to what you're doing. I know I took speech with Mr. Bolton, and those are some of my favorite memories with my peers, and I really remember all the speeches they memorized or the speeches they talked about, and the stories that they engaged with. And I think just that piece of sharing your own story just through speaking is really powerful. And then I think another way that you could possibly engage is just forming your own clubs and committees. I know at Liberty here we have those, and I think that can really help you, because I know we have robotics and people who are really excited about that and really they do see the beauty, often will flock to that area, and then they're able to bounce off each other. I think that can be really meaningful. But I also just think it's like who you surround yourselves with, and that at the end of the day is the student's choice. Because I know like I have different groups that I bounce between, and there are people who are really just seeking after the grades, whatever, or then there are people who are maybe thinking more deeply and really engaging with it, and just being around those types of people really inspires you, So that's what I'd say.
Let me follow it up. How does the 38-year-old version of yourself and the 58-year-old version, the 68-year-old version perpetuate this and hang on to the insights you have in the 18-year-old version of yourself?
Yeah.
How do you keep doing this when you're no longer in this kind of context in a school?
Yeah, I would think that one thing, it's just like reaching out and doing things with people, like even this boy event here, and coming and really taking that initiative to go and talk with people, doing book clubs and like coming to presentations. But I also think reading is a really good way, because like books are always going to be there. Like pandemic, we saw how you can be torn apart from people, not be able to interact with them. But with a book, you can still like dive into that world and almost feel young again, because like even like reading a book, it's weird how I can feel old almost reading a book, and I would assume it would work the other way as well, although I haven't lived that yet, but I'm maybe confirm that. I would maybe say that.
Well, when you read A.A. Milne, you got to feel young again. You gotta
Yeah,
feel
feel like a
right
2-year-old, yeah, okay,
Exactly.
that is true.
I want to answer Dr. Williams' question for you. I want to answer his question for you.
Okay, sounds good.
Is one of the ways you can do that is your 38-year-old self and your 58-year-old self is teaching at Liberty Commons.
Good.
I think, Cindy, that's a
Oh
really
my
good strategy
gosh.
to hang on to that.
That was not my answer.
No, that's
Mr. Lovely's answer.
100% your answer.
We can coordinate that. He didn't ask me to set him up.
Yeah.
Sure, still
Yeah.
doing piece of
But not a bad
paper.
answer.
Yeah, the Reinke sisters could just have a dynasty here, Stephen,
Oh my goodness.
Well,
Give a new light bulb for
speaking
Mr.
of a dynasty, and we can wrap it up since we're a little over time. Somebody named Dan Reinke, you might know,
Oh.
says he
that's
sees
Uncle Dan.
beauty in his grandparents teaching his grandkids things, the
Hmm.
teachers and the learners. Yeah, so there you
Oh.
go. He also has a Liverpool poster behind him, so I'm not sure if we can trust him.
Yeah, you
No, absolutely not. That's fine.
no, that's how we know he's a good
Yes.
No,
Absolutely not.
Well, we'll try to keep calm and carry on, but I think we're about out of time. Feel free to hang out and give some more comments or questions. We didn't certainly get to all of them, but once again, give it up for Sydney. Thank you.
All right.
Bye, Zoom people. Thanks for tuning in.
You bet. Good job.
Yeah, so
Sydney, I can't wait to watch it.
It's great.
Okay.